zone, sector, network and elevation. Okay, so we'll start with zone. Now this is a word which means something slightly different in permaculture to what it might mean in general speech. What we mean in permaculture is that the zone of a piece of land is the amount of human attention that it receives. So that land just outside your kitchen window, that receives an awful lot more attention than that piece of land right down the other end of the garden behind the bushes that you don't see from one week to the next. And so the principle here is to put those things which need the most human attention where they receive that human attention as part of your natural day-to-day round, without having to make a special effort to go and see things. So a couple of examples. One, for example, supposing amongst the different things you want to grow, there's a herb bed. You want to grow aromatic herbs, and you also want to grow potatoes. I mean, this is a very easy example, but I just sort of include it to get us going. Obviously, you want the herb bed right outside the kitchen window so you can nip out when you're cooking and get lovely fresh herbs. Whereas the potatoes, although the potatoes require much more work than the herb bed, it comes in occasional but large dollops of work. You know, you have a day when you go out and plant them, you have a day when you go out and earth them up, you have a day, well, it might not be a whole day. It's not just frequent visits like it is with the herbs. So the potatoes can be far away. I mean, a lot of us may have a home garden and also have an allotment. And so obviously you put the potatoes on the allotment and have your herbs in the home garden. And I think, was it you, Olivier, was saying you've got a situation rather like that? Yes, where you have your potatoes and other large-scale crops a bit in a more communal place and your more intricate things closer to home. That's good permaculture, that's good zoning. And it's only common sense. I mean, most of permaculture is just applied common sense. But as my grandmother used to say, there's one thing that's not very common on this earth, and that's common sense. Quite right. And you see some of the things that go on. So, that's just one element. If we look at the garden as a whole, here in Britain you very often get a long narrow garden like this. I mean, those of you who live in other countries may not recognise this pattern, but we certainly get this where this is a plan view. There's the house, maybe a terrace house or semi-detached or detached, whatever, and out front there's perhaps a couple of shrubs. At the back, a flower bed, maybe something like that, surrounding a lawn. Of course, we always have a lawn. Maybe a big tree. Then somewhere back here, there's a thick privet hedge. And beyond that is the vegetables and the greenhouse. Shut away in case anybody should actually see you growing vegetables. I mean, it's quite an interesting cultural thing, this reason why we lay out our gardens like that. And I don't really want to go into it. Well, I would love to, but we haven't got time. But this is the custom. And the one thing that can most easily be done to improve the productivity of this garden is to move the vegetables and the greenhouse and the fruit, whatever, those edible elements, to here, to right outside the kitchen window, where you can see them. You're standing there washing up. And okay, some people might say, well, I don't want to look out at serried ranks of Brussels sprouts, I want to look at something nice. Well, plants are beautiful, you know, we can make them look ugly if we really work at it. But also we have this style of gardening called the potager, In French, I think it just simply means a vegetable garden, but here in English, the implication is that it's a garden which is productive but also beautiful, partly because some sort of flowers and herbs and so forth are included, but also just simply because the different vegetables and fruits and so forth are placed in such a way that they will, leaf shapes and leaf colours and leaf textures and so forth will contrast with each other. The difference in productivity is incredible, because you notice things that need doing when they need doing. So if the plants start to look a little bit dry, you notice that when they start looking dry, rather than when they've already been dry for some days and productivity has already suffered from lack of water. You see the weeds coming up when they're still small, before they've started competing with the crop, and at a time when you can get rid of them just by hoeing, rather than having to go through and pull them out individually. So not only does it increase the yield, it also reduces the work. Just simply having things there where you see them as a matter of course. Not only does it increase the yield, it actually increases the amount of that yield that you get to harvest. Here you are in your house, cooking a meal, and you've got something boiling on one ring, something simmering on another, you've got a child pulling at your trouser leg going wah, 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 and you think, I'll just go and get some greens, and you look out and it starts raining and you think, oh, never mind, I'll open a tin of beans. And I've seen that in less extreme circumstances than those I have described. You actually get to eat more. I mean, you can see what is ready to eat much better, but also it's not such an effort to go and get it. I knew a family once who they had a large orchard, several hectares of orchard, which wasn't their main means of income, but it was a commercial venture. And they also had their home vegetable garden, which was about 50 metres away from the house, behind a tall conifer hedge. And it never worked for them. They hardly harvested anything out of that vegetable garden. So they moved it from there to a place in between their house and where they parked their car. And it was much smaller, and they ate much more food out of it. It's such a powerful tool that it's impossible really to exaggerate. You might say, well, that doesn't apply to me because my house and garden is like that. It's all the same. Is it? If this is your front door and this is your front gate, actually this area here is going to receive an awful lot more attention than those areas there. I mean, there'll probably be another one here outside your kitchen window. I keep on about the kitchen window, but you sort of do notice things when you're washing up.
If you've got one like that.
If you've got one like that, yes. If you haven't got a washing up machine. But no, the point I'm making here is that there will always be some difference in any garden. Okay, and at this point we can look at the images. So someone would like to turn out the light. So this is a small market garden where a couple actually make their living off this, growing mostly salads, and I visited them and gave them some permaculture advice when they just bought it and before they set it up. And one of the things I said was, whatever you do, have your vegetable garden right outside, as close as possible to your house. Well, they haven't got a house, they've got a yurt, which is placed just about here. And quite unprompted by me, when I visited this chap about 4 or 5 years later, he said, oh, you can talk about soil fertility, you can talk about compost and all this, that and the other, but for me, the most important thing, the thing that makes the most difference to this garden is the fact that the vegetables are right outside the yurt. And so he just notices everything, and it's convenient, and There's not, because it's on a very steep slope. You see, he actually had to make terraces here in order to create flat ground. Not a problem you get in the Netherlands, I believe. But there's just no flat ground on the holding at all. Which was probably why he was able to afford to buy it. Also, his wife said it's great for her because she can have the children playing in the yurt, and she can go out and work, and then, you know, if she hears their raised voices, she just nips back in and gives them some attention, which she couldn't possibly do if the yurt and the garden were in different parts of the holding. So that, I think, is a good example. Thanks, please. I said we'd come back to the conservatory. This is the conservatory of a friend of ours who's got a sort of a large domestic garden, sort of semi-commercial. She has a barrow with an honesty box down in the village where she sells some stuff. So, you know, it's quite a large garden. And she doesn't do her protected cropping in this conservatory. She's got a polytunnel, in fact a couple of polytunnels, which are down the end of the garden where she does that. But what she does here is she brings on her seedlings in the spring. So baby plants are just, you know, just like humans. If they get the attention they need in those that very first bit of their life, then they're likely to be strong and healthy throughout the rest of their life. Whereas if they don't get that, then they'll be struggling thereafter. So it's actually very important. And here you had, you know, you imagine there you are in March. You've got your seedlings in a greenhouse down the end of the garden. You know, it's a matter of pulling on your raincoat, your wellies and your hat and everything, trudging off down the path. Have a look at them, see how they are, see if they need watering or any other kind of attention. Whereas in here, it's just a matter of moving from one room of your house to another. Don't even have to change out of your fluffy slippers. And so I was talking about those energy relationships between the house and the greenhouse earlier on. Well, here we're looking at the relationship between the people in the house and the plants in the greenhouse. And that is equally important. So there's a great emphasis in permaculture on the people being part of the system. And people always are part of the system. And so, given identical physical conditions on two different sites, as though such a thing was possible, you might come up with two quite different permaculture designs, because one of them would be to suit one lot of people or one person, and the other lot would be to suit another lot of people. So, you know, the people are an absolutely integral part of the design, and listening to the people is as important as observing the landscape. Next, please. Here we are up in the hills of Wales, and here we have a farm which has got lots of windbreaks on it. And when I saw that, I was quite pleased, although I felt that the choice of tree species could have been a little bit more imaginative. But I looked at it and I thought, hang on a minute, they got that all wrong. They've got all the windbreaks down in the valley, where it's already quite sheltered. They should be up on top of the hill. But actually, I was completely wrong on that, because what you've got down in the valley is all the valuable elements, the things that actually need shelter. You've got the farmhouse, the lambing shed, the vegetable garden, the in-by land where the ewes and lambs go out immediately after lambing. Whereas up on the hilltops, all you've got is a bit of rough grazing, and the sheep mainly go up there in summertime anyway, and the output from that is not very great. There was a very interesting study done by the Forestry Commission a few years ago, where they looked at the financial return on growing windbreaks and shelter belts, and they found that it's all quite counterintuitive. They are not most profitable where the wind is strongest. They are most profitable where the value of the crop is highest. So actually down in the valley, where you've got deep fertile soil, and you're growing market garden crops and arable crops and that kind of thing, dairy cows, it's much more worthwhile to have windbreaks there. Unfortunately, that's just the sort of place where farmers are reluctant because they don't want to give up a piece of land to something which they see as being unproductive. But even allowing for the fact that you do give up a piece of land to the windbreak or the windbreaks, it's still more worthwhile. You get more of a financial return. So that although this is also about windbreaks and that kind of thing, there's a very important zoning element in that picture. Next, please. Moving into town. This is Michael Guerra, and we'll be seeing more of him later on. Him and his wife Julia. And this is their little house in a town near London, and they grow an awful lot of vegetables in the small amount of space available to them. And growing vegetables and fruit in towns is very much a part of permaculture. It's I say vegetables and fruit because those are the things that are most worthwhile to grow in a town. If you look at the contrast between growing things in the town, where the people live but there's not much land, compared with growing things in the country, the things that are most valuable to grow are things that repay being eaten very fresh, and things which are mostly water, which fruit and vegetables are. They're about 80% water. Whereas grain, it's much more worthwhile to grow that out in the country where we've got large areas and it's only about 10% water, and you can transport that quite economically, and also doesn't need to be eaten dead fresh. And animal products, the same, even milk. So there's a great thrust in permaculture towards growing food in towns, and this is zoning again. It's actually putting the things nearest to the centre of human attention. And there's quite a lot of evidence to show and that the smaller the scale of the production, the more productive it is. So on the whole, gardens tend to be more productive per square metre than farms, because people can give more attention to a smaller area. On a small area, your unit of production is one individual plant, whereas on a larger area, it's a whole hectare. Okay, next please. Growing food in public open space is something that, certainly in this country, there's a huge prejudice against, but there's no reason why we shouldn't do it. People come up with the most ridiculous reasons. Somebody might eat it. What a terrible thing, people might eat food. This is a housing estate near where we live, which was actually built on the site of a former orchard. So that large tree in the background is a walnut, this smaller one in the foreground is a medlar, and there's no reason, those happen to be there already, but there's no reason why they shouldn't have been planted. And the next picture shows us some of that going on. This is a picture from our colleague Sarah Pugh, who will be with us, is it later this week? Or is it next week?
Thursday, yeah.
On Thursday, yeah. She works in Bristol, and you can see, get some idea of the landscape there. It's very crowded, not much space, and this is one of the rare spaces where there actually is somewhere where you can plant a few fruit trees. And she and her, the other people who are working with her in Bristol, they got the idea of having a communal orchard. And then they thought, well, actually there's not enough land for an orchard anywhere in this inner city district where they live. And so they came up with the idea of making trees available to people who could have just one or two trees in their own back garden. And so they launched this project where people could order a tree or two or three, and they would buy them at wholesale price, so people got them very cheap, and then on a certain day in the winter everyone came to pick up their tree, and they'd be given instruction on planting and aftercare. They'd go away, plant their trees. And it started off quite slowly, but by year 3 they really had quite a large number of people doing that, and we copied it in Glastonbury as well. and did the same thing, and it can be really successful, that. So that's you know, an example of a permaculture project in an inner city area. So that's zone. I mean, I've shown you pictures of zone because I just happen to have some good pictures of it, you know. But it is an incredibly valuable concept, and I think it's the most valuable concept that there is in permaculture.